This
Hopefully she kept her
conference will now
Kevlar
be
jacket
recorded.
from the state park days. Yeah.
So the next thing on our agenda is approval of the agenda. And I believe we need a motion for that.
So moved.
I'll second.
Can we just do all in favor, say aye, or gosh, Steve, do we have to roll call?
Roll call, sorry.
All right. Okay, I'll do that. Director Duncan,
Aye.
Director Johnson,
Aye.
Director Rosenboom,
Aye.
and I also approve. Mr. Poole, have there been any comments from the public or requests for future agenda items?
None received, Madam President, Vice President.
It's okay. Are there any comments from the directors? No, quietness here, no. Mr. Poole, how about correspondence received from the public?
You know, John Peterson did send an email kind of pertaining to his interest and kind of overall support and concern about the de minimis well. So I'll kind of save those comments until we get to that item on the agenda, but that was it.
Okay.
And air quality, I think, right? Air quality monitoring.
Oh, that's right. And air quality monitoring also. He had sent me 2 emails. You're right. Air quality was the most recent. Yeah. Thanks, Diane.
Okay. Well, we will, I guess, hear about those when we get to those 2 topics. We will now move to items for board consideration. Number A, air quality monitoring. And I see we have a guest, Mr. Garman.
Good morning, Madam Vice President and directors. Thank you for the opportunity to be with you today. I don't know how you want to proceed. Jeff did forward to me questions that I think arose the last time this board discussed this issue. And I can work from those, or if you would prefer to proceed in another fashion, just let me know.
Thank you for accepting the invitation, David. You were definitely missed at the last meeting. So basically, yeah, those were the questions. Madam Vice President, I'll let you answer about how you would like to proceed procedurally. But I think there were 3 or 4 questions. And then if there are any new ones, we definitely have time, and David is here. He graciously canceled this or rescheduled his first appointment today to allow him to be here this morning. So if there's anything new that comes up, let's work through that, and hopefully you can direct staff accordingly based on what you want to do. So Tammy, how would you like to proceed?
David, I think it'd be great if you just step through the questions since they're all here in the board packet.
Okay.
And then we can ask you anything else that we might have.
Great, happy to do that. And just by way of beginning, I did let Dr. Zender know about the invitation to be here this morning, but he is traveling out of the country today, so is not able to be here. So the first question is, ask David Garman whether a quarter-time analyst will have enough time to do current work plus catch up with the 2-year air quality monitoring backlog. And also, by way of preamble, I have been in touch with Dr. Zender on all of these questions. We were able to go back and forth via email. So this is not just my opinion, but this is actually coming from Dr. Zender as well. So yeah, Charlie said that the quarter-time analyst would have enough time to do the current work plus catch up with the 2-year air quality monitoring backlog, but that it would probably take about 6 months for a new person to come up to speed with our monitoring system, with the analysis that needs to be done, and that they would be able to work through that backlog. But you know, they've also got to become familiar with the EPA standards against which they're analyzing this data. So his opinion was that there would be about a 6-month, he called it spin up period, that it would take for the person to get through, come up to speed and get through the backlog. The next question, I think, will be the meat of our conversation today. provide a comparison for a half-time versus a quarter-time air quality analyst. So starting with the simplest one, the quarter-time air quality analyst. And the reason that we're even looking at this is because the quarter-time person obviates the need for UCI to pay fringe benefits, and so it represents a financial advantage to BWD. But Dr. Zender's thought about the quarter-time person was, if we are lucky, that quarter-time person would be able to spin up in about 6 months' time. And if the person is a capable and motivated person, that person would be able to continue and complete the intercalibration project, which is part of this. And just to give you a little information, in order for our data to be compelling for the Air Pollution Control District, it's important that we're able to demonstrate that we are measuring what we say we're measuring, and that our measurements are in alignment with the official EPA monitoring machines. And the closest EPA monitoring machines are near the Salton Sea. And we previously have been working on an intercalibration project to make sure that our machines are in alignment with the EPA machine. And towards that end, we bought a mobile nephelometer, air quality measuring device, that we're able to take to the EPA machines and compare those readings with our nephelometers in Borrego. We got about halfway through that intercalibration project when the postdoc that I think most people may have met retired from academia to have a family. So we're about halfway through that project. And coming back full circle, so Charlie's thought was, if we're lucky, a quarter-time person would be able to do that work. If we were not fortunate, then that project would be something that would just never quite be gotten to. The quarter-time and half-time person that we're talking about would be of similar academic preparation, either master's level or doctorate level prepared. But Charlie's thinking was that the commitment and quality of the person that we were likely to get with a half-time offer, the probability is that it would be a better individual, more capable, who is more likely to stay with the project than somebody who's just hired on a quarter-time basis. So going to the third question, ask UCI for a better description of what we're getting for the money. So what we're getting for the money is, one, the data, to be able to continue to collect the data. But the data by itself is worthless. And so also what we're getting is the ability to analyze that data in the context of EPA clean air standards. And the third thing that's on the table that we'll have to talk about is the likelihood of being able to demonstrate that our data is measuring what it says it measures by virtue of this intercalibration process. The other thing that Charlie said about this, at this point we have about 6 years of uninterrupted data, and that is a very good foundation for a robust database. And what we're looking at now is increasing that by another 50%, by another 3 years. And at 9 years, we certainly will have enough data to be able to demonstrate baseline air qualities and variations from that baseline with a lot of confidence in the data set that we have. So that was long-winded and has a fair amount of information in it, I hope. But those are the basic answers to the questions. And if I'd like to entertain any questions that the directors might have now.
David, I'm sorry. I was looking for that EPA air monitor near the Salton Sea. How many additional years did you say it right at the end it will take to have a good solid data?
Well, we have a good database now. We're just making it stronger and more robust. The longer our data set, the more confidence that we can have in the trends that we're seeing.
So this next 3-year period that we're talking about funding should be really good, huh?
Yes, exactly. And I don't know if everybody understood this intercalibration process. I guess I want to elaborate on that a little more. When we were first setting this project up, Dr. Zinder and I think Jeff was on the call, somebody else from the county was on the call, and we were in conversation with the Air Pollution Control District, which is responsible for the EPA machines and those measurements. And they were very clear that they can't include anybody's any extraneous data in their data sets. So the citizen science that's going on, the purple air monitor stuff that's going on, and even our stuff that's going on, they can't include those in their data sets per se. But what they encouraged us to do was to do an intercalibration project to demonstrate that our nephelometers are functioning properly and are measuring the same things that their nephelometers are measuring. And so to make what we're interested in doing is being able to demonstrate to the Air Pollution Control District when there are exceedances that requires their attention. They're the ones who are responsible for maintaining clean air standards. And if we have the data and we can demonstrate that our data is good data and that it's measuring what we say, then it makes it very difficult for them to turn a blind eye to our air quality.
And yeah, I'll just say that's a very important thing. But I was going to ask about purple air. We have all of this money for community engagement that's coming in with Proposition 68, which I know is water, but and I do get emails from CARB, from the California Air Resources Board. They seem to be behind purple air / citizen monitoring. Is there any way that Irvine could, are they doing anything with that? Is there any way they could help us sort of get that going?
Yes, and Diane, I don't know if you remember, but and I think we did this through the Borrego Valley Endowment Fund for the Prop 68 funding. Dr. Zinder and I did put together a proposal for Prop 68 funding, and a big chunk of that proposal would have installed, I forget the number, 40, 50, 60 purple air monitors
Right.
throughout the valley. And so that is something that we've looked at well enough to put a budget together, and is something that I would love to see as an augmentation of the system that we have now. But it's not part of the budgets that we're talking about today. The budgets that we're looking at today are for a quarter-time person or a half-time person. Oh, and I should say, the two budgets that you have actually are quarter time budgets, but calculated in different ways. And I have a rough number here from Dr. Zinder that if we were going to do a half-time person, that budget over 3 years would be about $150,000, right at $150,000.
Do other directors have questions? Paul?
Yes.
Yeah, thanks, David. I appreciate your presentation. Just for context, what is the current state of air quality monitoring in the basin, and just what do we seek to add by funding this?
Yeah. Well, so I think we are unusual in that we have 5 nephelometers stationed throughout the basin. 3 of them are measuring PM10, and 2 of them are measuring PM2.5. It may be the other way around. I forget my 2 and 3 there, but we're measuring PM2.5 and PM10. And the reason that we're measuring that size of particulate matter is because that is the size of particulate matter that is regulated by the EPA clean air standards. So we wanted to make sure we were monitoring the right thing. We have been doing that for approximately 6 years, and we were analyzing the data until about 1.5 years ago. And we were seeing there were some exceedances of clean air standards. It was not egregious, not off the charts, but there were episodes of exceedances. We stopped analyzing the data about 1.5 years ago when the postdoc who was hired at that time to do the analysis retired from academia. But in that subsequent time, that 1.5 years, we've continued to use the funding that was approved by the Endowment Fund and BWD in 2020. When she left academia, there was money left over, so we've been able to use that money to keep the machines going, basically, to do the maintenance. So we haven't had a data gap, which is good. And we have a robust database that just needs an analysis, really.
Okay, thank you. And is there any ongoing studies with this data of various people using it for their PhD dissertations or being part of any other research?
You know, the first 3 or 4 years, the project was being used for a postdoc, Morgan Goris, who was using our system to look at using weather forecasting software, which is used for like forecasting the movement of hurricanes, was looking to see if that software could be used on the very small scale that we're thinking about in the Borrego Valley. Turns out that it won't work on that scale, but the project did provide the data for some of her academic work. And Diane, I think you just forwarded something. She was published recently looking at valley fever in the Southwest.
I didn't catch that she was one of the authors on that. That's great. That is something. I was just reading about that this morning. That's something I think we need to worry about with these dust events we've been having.
Right, especially with climate change. But so Paul, to your question, we were part of her academic beginnings there.
Okay, thank you. I really appreciate that.
Sure.
Hey, Madam Vice President, if I could add on to that, like from my perspective, like analysis of this data is important, but to me, this is part of a much longer process in which, and then to kind of get to Paul's point, and oftentimes we all scratch our heads about, gee, why is the water district concerned about air quality? Those are 2 different elements, right? Well, they're connected because of the impacts of fallowing. And the way I look at this data now is this is the before picture.
Right.
You know, over this next 20 years, and it's starting already, you know, I think one farm is being replanted, but, you know, there is some crop reduction that is happening already out there from the various agricultural pumpers just to maintain and to stay within their pumping allowances. You know, the ramp down has begun. So there are farmers out there that already are already starting to take trees out. But that's going to happen on a much larger scale over the next, 18 years. So, you know, how many acres are going to be fallowed? Well, I mean, I guess in rough numbers, you would say, well, 75% of them, because, and hopefully more, but a minimum of 75% of the current irrigated acreage will ultimately be fallowed over this next, 18-year period. So to me, this is data that, maybe us, but definitely our successors will be very happy we have this data, because there's no way to get this back. And to really know what the impacts are of fallowing, maybe, progressively as we go, to maybe be able to even take additional steps to try to minimize the air quality impacts of fallowing. This would give us very early indicators. So, the more data we have now, kind of before the mass fallowing has begun, in my opinion, the better. It's a lot of money. It's spread out over 3 years, which is good. From staff's perspective, I do really think there is a nexus between, the implementation of the groundwater management plan and its impacts on air quality. I'd love for this discussion to be at the Water Master someday. So this is definitely kind of a basin-wide issue. But, I think, once again, it's super important to make sure that we keep accumulating the data, and the fact that we can get caught up, that's awesome. I had forgotten about the recalibration, which to me seems like another important step, right? Just for the acceptance of the data going forward. So, long story short, and then the John Peterson comment, if you don't mind, Madam Vice President, John just said, I strongly believe we need to be monitoring air quality, and thank the BWD for their potential assistance in the program. So once again, from staff's perspective, boy, it's a bit of a head scratcher, but unfortunately nobody else is doing it. And to me, it's such an important issue. And like I said, there's no going back. And what John Peterson, what data not gathered is data lost, right? He's talking about air quality, but this also applies. I'm sorry, he's talking about water quality, but this also applies to air quality. So whatever that's worth. And we do have the non-rate revenue funds. Obviously, we watch every dollar we spend, but, I think this would be a reasonable expense going forward. And, someday in the future, the people are going to say, oh my gosh, I am so glad the Water District continued that program, because without this important data, without the starting point, it's really hard to know the impacts you're having as you go. So anyway, I'll stop there, Madam Vice President. Thank you very much. But kind of from staff's perspective, this is a worthy project. Hopefully we can find others to fund it going forward. But yeah, we think it's worth going through. Thanks.
Yeah, David?
Yeah, I would just like to underscore what Jeff is saying, that at this point we have a very robust baseline data set. The 6 years of data it's extraordinary that we have it. We might even say prescient that we have it. And the importance of that is, if we were to start an air quality monitoring program today or next year or 2 years from now, and we're measuring air quality, without this baseline, we would have no way of knowing what the changes were. And if we didn't have this data, we would be back in that situation where we were 7 years ago, where, on days we would look out and go, wow, really crappy air quality. Wonder what that's about, and maybe we should do something about that. Let somebody call the Air Pollution Control District. And a number of us tried that route, and 2 weeks later, the Air Pollution Control District people would come out, and it would be a bright sunny day, and they'd say, gosh, you guys have great air quality, no problems here. So if we are interested in the air quality in the valley, the only way that we can have any say, really, any impact in that arena is through the collection and the analysis of this data. The other thing that I would say is, and I don't know if Jeff has mentioned this, but the Borrego Valley Endowment Fund does have $22,000 that we would have earmarked to put against this 3-year budget that we're talking about today.
Yeah, David, that's in there. So it's basically 99,000 minus 22. So I have it in the staff report under the the fiscal impacts of how that would shake out.
Right. That's if the board decides to go with the quarter time
Correct.
person.
Yep. Yeah, perfect.
I've also been talking with Becky Falk of the sponsor group, who works with the county in so many ways. And she feels like we might be able to get some money from the county to help with this air quality monitoring. That would be great. There's a whole new environmental justice component of the general plan, and the county is putting money into that.
And I will say that Becky and I have had a couple of conversations over the last year or two with their new environmental justice person. And Diane, you have to help me with her name because it escapes me right now.
Audrey Hamilton, I think.
Yeah, that was it, exactly. Of letting her know that we exist, what we're doing, and what the reasons for it are.
Yeah, and I'd like to see BWD get a gold star for having already been working on this and supporting it. We should be recognized for that, as well as UCI.
So I'm hearing general support for this. Jeff, are you looking for a motion for the board to approve the $76,000 over 3 years? Is that what you're asking?
That's it, David, right? I mean, UCI wants the long-term commitment from us that we are committing to the 3-year program. And so the answer is yes, right, David? We're ready?
Yeah, that's correct.
Yep.
Does someone want to make a motion to that regard?
I'll move, Diane.
And I see Paul seconding. So we have a motion on the floor that the Water District approved funding the air quality monitoring project for 3 years for a total of $76,000. And I will call the roll. Paul, you're first to my screen here.
I appreciated Jeff's comment linking it to Fowler. So I'll vote aye.
Right.
Might you ask for public comment?
Thank you, Dave. I appreciate that. Is there public comment? Okay. All right. I'll call the roll. Director Duncan.
Aye.
Director Johnson.
Aye.
Director Rosenboom.
Aye.
And I also approve. Motion carries. Thank you, David, for joining us.
Oh, thank you. It's a pleasure to see everybody. And I'm glad we're going to move forward with this project. Thank you.
Thanks, David.
All right, moving on to item 2B, California State Proposition 68 grant draft agreements.
To be or not to be or not to be? That is the question. So we are discussing the ongoing and seemingly never-ending. I think it was about a year ago this process started. We started working on the application. I think it was the Halloween weekend, but this is the latest step in the Prop 68 process. Prop 68, for those of you that have missed an episode or two, is the $6.1 million grant from the State Department of Water Resources for MyWords GSP GNP implementation. BWD solicited project proposals from really any qualifying organization in the basin. And the ones that were responded and the ones that continued through the process actually were all approved tentatively by DWR, and which was very unique. I think we were the only grant application in the state that had such a diverse, and I'm not sure anyone had like this sub-grantee concept that we're talking about, where totally separate agencies are managing their own projects within this DWR umbrella. So yeah, it was a lot of fun, and I'm really happy. We have the big check is still sitting there in the front office. We haven't cashed it yet because we need some agreements to be approved. And so Steve has been doing a really good job in working with Watermaster Legal Counsel on this sub-grantee agreement. So basically, there's two agreements that are out there. It would be the agreement for the grant itself between BWD and the state of California, DWR. So that's the real commitment that BWD is making. And then the concept is we are passing through all the responsibilities and liabilities for these individual projects to each individual project proponent / applicant. And that is why this sub-grantee agreement has been created. So basically, each sub-grantee would be agreeing to comply with all the terms of the BWD-DWR agreement, plus other requirements. And that would all be agreed upon by the district and each one of these individual organizations before the project even begins. And obviously, there are requirements, reporting, accounting, and other requirements that are a must going through the process, which Jessica and I and Diana and others will be watching closely as we go. And so we'll help manage the projects from the relationship with us and DWR, but each one of these individual organizations are really on their own in managing their own projects, which is a little bit of new news. The Stewardship Council was always a little bit of a question mark in my mind in terms of what level of participation would that organization be needing and requesting from BWD? And I think we all talked about it here at a couple board meetings about, gee, would they need financial support and other support kind of above and beyond what would typically be needed by an organization who's running their own project, like a UCI, for example, or the school district or the Watermaster. And thank you, Diane and Kathy and others. Bree at ABF was involved and other people in the organization, in the community, and they have been advising the Stewardship Council and working with CivicWell, which is a 501c3, and the Stewardship Council and CivicWell have decided they're going to pursue and manage their own project on their own. So no special provisions will be needed with the Stewardship Council / CivicWell. So all the requirements of the Watermaster, school district, and UCI agreements, which are the other sub-grantees, will all be in essence the same. The names will be changed for each organization, but they will all be agreeing to comply with the same requirements. So the DWR had some questions up until even as recent as maybe 2 weeks ago on the Stewardship Council project. Oh, and then there was the real problem, issue, and challenge, and big question mark was kind of the overall need for the Stewardship Council project, just because its main deliverable was to, in essence, encapsulate public input by going through this process to ultimately feed the community plan update that was going to be the process that was going to be undertaken by the County of San Diego. I've been hearing about that as long as I've been here. Oh, the community plan update's coming, the community plan update's coming. And I guess the community plan update, as previously identified, is not coming. No, I've heard that another process will be happening. So the Stewardship Council and CivicWell and all these other organizations here that are involved locally also did a lot of work quickly. And thank you to the CivicWell folks. They responded to DWR's questions rapidly and coalesced the group's thoughts, and the moral of the story and the end result is the Stewardship Council will be proceeding on their own, just like all the other applicants, and managing their own project. So to me, that's all great news. And so we are ready to proceed. We are still waiting. BWD is still waiting for the final agreement between DWR and DWD. Our grant manager has finished his and her review, Kelly and Chris, and they have forwarded their draft to DWR Legal for its final review. Then DWR Legal will then be, and through our grant managers, will be distributing the final DWR BWD agreement back to us. When will that happen? Good question. I'm hoping it will happen before the next board meeting 2 weeks from today. Actually, I would need it obviously a couple days in advance to make it into the packet, but my hope is that we will have the final DWR BWD agreement ready to be approved in 2 weeks. If there are any changes between what we see in 2 weeks and what's in the packet here today, we'll definitely highlight them for you. I'll let you know the importance and significance of any changes that happen between the document we're looking at today and what the final version looks like. And kind of the same thing on the sub-grantee agreement. You know, we're maybe a little bit early in looking at the sub-grantee agreement now because we don't know exactly what all the final DWR requirements are going to be. I'm fairly confident that there won't be any significant substantive contractual changes to the DWR agreement based on the previous version. To me, the most recent discussions have all revolved around specific projects and what's the primary goal of the Stewardship Council process. And they were asking about the type of materials that the school's going to use, and will these be certified by the Department of Education? And so, you know, DWR had a bunch of random and then good questions about each one of the projects. So, and then those have all been addressed. I don't anticipate any major changes to the contract itself, but if there are some, we'll let you know what they are between what we're looking at today and the final draft. So that's kind of paints the picture of where we are. Steve and his team's done a great job in putting these documents together and a little PowerPoint for us to look at today and everything. So how about this? Are there any questions about what I've spoken about in terms of process and where we are? And if not, Steve can go ahead and tell you what's in the agreement. Once again, we're not asking for approval today, just more comments, Q&A, and then we will return hopefully in 2 weeks with the final drafts of everything and then be asking for approval. And then I do believe on the Water Master agenda, they're asking for approval of this sub-grantee agreement, just because they meet once a month and because Mandy and Sam are becoming more and more concerned about the time it's taken to get the agreement signed, because that's eating into their ability to get their projects done. So they're going to ask for board approval of the sub-grantee agreement at the meeting later this week. Once again, if there are dramatic changes in what the final version becomes, Sam might have to go back to the Water Master board to ask for approval again, but the Water Master is trying to at least get everything approved as quickly as possible, and Sam is asking for board approval of the sub-grantee agreement this Thursday. So that's where we are. Any questions? Well, you, Steve.
So we
Thanks,
have
Jeff.
David. David has a question, so go ahead, David.
Jeff, your observation that it's taken longer than we thought to do the agreement and the sub-agreements, it is eating substantially into the 3-year period. Is there any discussion with DWR about extending the end date to address this change in the time frame?
Yeah, unfortunately, that can't happen, just because as with all bond proceeds, they must be spent within 3 years. And it's 3 years from when the funds are appropriated. So unfortunately, the clock has already started on that. And so it's, what was it, March or May 2025 is the drop dead date in which all funds must be spent by then to be reimbursable. Now, in verbal communications with DWR, they did say a lot of the internal schedules that we provided to DWR as part of the application process, those obviously can and will need to be adjusted. Because I'm betting in what was submitted to DWR, we should be working already and maybe have some of the tasks done by now. So yeah, so they're cool with changing the dates within the project, but unfortunately the end date is the end date.
Thank you.
Jeff, can I just add quickly that I think in this grant agreement, it's just a little more time to complete the work than it was originally. It's now April 30th that all the work of 2025, David, that all the work has to be completed, and no funds may be requested after June 30th. So I think they gave us a few extra months there at the end. It used to be that no funds could be requested, I think, earlier than, like March or something. That's all. Thanks.
Yeah.
And just for the board's knowledge, the schedule doesn't impact BWD as much, just because we have a couple projects that fortunately we have the ability to get going and get ready and be ready to really start and implement the project as soon as these grant agreements are signed. What I mean by that is on the monitoring wells, we're working with the property owner daily/weekly on getting all the easements and the various access rights acquired so BWD can install the monitoring wells that's part of that grant. So we're very, very close to, once we have these easement agreements signed, being ready to bid the project to install the monitoring wells. And then we have what the metering, the advanced metering infrastructure grant project that's on our list. Tammy, Jessica, David, Alan have already started to work on this. They've been working on it for months now and have a good idea of what the bid package should look like. And once we really do have the DWR agreements all signed, that group will almost be ready to go to bid. I think that's the goal, is to be ready to go to bid as soon as possible after all these various documents are signed. But at least for the good news from our perspective, I mean, I have sympathy for everyone else. The Water Master and others have to literally wait until these agreements are signed to start doing anything. But we've had the ability to at least get really, really ready. So once these agreements are signed, we can literally start the projects right away. So thanks, Tammy, Jessica, and everybody else for getting us this far.
Steve, I think it's over. Oh, David?
Yeah, I just had one more comment that occurred to me. We've been fortunate with our project to have UCI as a partner, and fortunate because they are intimately familiar with the reporting requirements, management requirements from the state. And on more than one occasion, Travis Huxman, who is our contact point at UCI, has mentioned that if BWD needed any sort of consultation or help in any of the management tasks that I think loom large for a lot of this project, that UCI would be more than happy to help in any way that they could. So just wanted to mention that that's a resource available if the need arises.
Thank you, David.
That's great. Thank you.
I mean, and maybe to get to that point, sorry, Steve, but the good news is the existing staff that's sitting here today have already successfully completed 2 grants. I think that first Prop 1 grant that went through the county for some of that outreach activities associated with the GSP, then the recent wastewater treatment plant grant. One of them being state revolving fund money, which most of this money is. So the good news is we're also familiar now. Where it gets complicated for us is we also have these sub-grantee projects to monitor, I guess might be the best word. We're not responsible for them, but we just want to make sure they don't get too far out of whack. So thank you for the offer. I will keep that in mind. Jessica and I will both keep that in mind. And we think we have it under control starting as we sit here today, but this one's a little bit different than what we've dealt with before, just because we have others involved. So thanks.
Steve Anderson, I think you're up.
Okay. Well, before I start, I wanted to ask 2 questions. Number one is, we have some slides in the packet, and they start, I think, about on page 95 or so of the packet of 200 pages, your board packet. I didn't know the extent to which the board wants me to go over everything, because I know the board members themselves are probably pretty familiar with the background, and Jeff went over some of it, but on the other hand, maybe the public wouldn't mind hearing just a little bit more about the background, as Jeff said, has been going on for about a year. So I defer to the board on how much you want me to go over on that part.
I would advocate that you do your slides because I would advocate you go for the slides and leave the background to questions. If people have specific questions.
Okay, thank you. So if the slide could be advanced to the next one. So as Jeff said, we have the background on this is that Proposition 68 was approved by the voters back in 2018, and through various actions of the legislature, it has been sort of, I won't say retooled or refocused, but it has been emphasized that it should be used as a vehicle and mechanism to provide grant funding in support of groundwater sustainability plans and groundwater management plans, serving as alternatives across the state. And so that's why you see where we are today in the bottom bullet there. We're in 2022, looking at this circumstance where we have, Borrego Water District has, along with its partners, been approved for about $6.1 million in grants. Next slide, please. And moving forward with both the grant agreement, which is the umbrella agreement between the Department of Water Resources and Borrego Water District for all of the individual projects, which we're calling the sort of compendium of umbrella, the project for purposes of this slide deck. But it's really, there are, I believe, 8 components to that overarching project that we'll go over. As the board just discussed, it's 3 years from the date of execution of the agreement. That's the term of the grant agreement. But as I think Diane just pointed out, the more important dates are that all funds need to be expended on all these various projects by the end of April of 3 years hence, 2025. You're given until June 30th to submit all the invoices for that, because the ordinary course is the quarterly reports are due 90 days after. That's why it references June 30th. And the total grant amount is a little over $6.1 million. And Jeff has got the big check in the front office if anyone wants to see that again. Next slide, please. So the overarching conditions for, and I'm sure many of you have worked on grant programs before, particularly with DWR, is that you have to comply both at the BWD level, but also the subgrantee level, with all sorts of just generic requirements, including the SGM grant program guidelines. I think that the public and the board are very familiar with those guidelines, because as part of your committee process last year, where you gave weighting and scored the various proposals, the members of the BWD board that were on that committee had to look at those eligibility guidelines pretty closely. And from an overarching perspective, the way this program works, like many other DWR grant programs, is quarterly progress reports have to be submitted by BWD to DWR. And in turn, what that means is that in order for BWD to be able to compile that quarterly progress report, we also are going to require in these subgrantee agreements that all the subgrantees give us their progress reports. So they become sort of appendices or part of what we submit to DWR to show that we're all on course to get our various projects done. There's no absolute requirement, as Jeff said. Well, I should say it this way. The absolute requirement is to get your projects all done by April of 2025. There is potential for a little bit of movement with respect to the interim deadlines between now and then. And so DWR has a little flexibility there, but at the end of the day, you gotta make progress as you can. To the extent there are any of the components that aren't just work, like report work, but are actual physical construction of things on the ground, well, then we need to have final plans and specifications certified by a registered civil engineer at the end of the process, and those submitted to DWR, I believe, with wet stamps in order to confirm that everything was done according to the guidelines and has met all the basic state requirements. And one thing I should really focus on here, because I think it's really important for all of the grantees and subgrantees to understand, is the way that this grant works is that no work on the grant can proceed not going out to bid until the CEQA is both approved by BWD, and we'll talk about how that gets done, but also the state has to sign off on that CEQA. So the grant is very clear that both BWD and the state have to sign off on the CEQA work for each one of these projects before you can start going down the road of bidding them or doing any work on them on the ground. And so that's an important thing to think about with respect to any of the projects. I think the Water Master has a project that has construction specifications to it. I think maybe UCI's project has some of that. I can't quite remember. But BWD's project certainly has, particularly the well it's going to drill, but also the AMI might have to. Seems like those are CEQA compliant projects. They need to comply with CEQA. The other thing is that even the projects that are just writing reports, I have a bunch of CEQA colleagues that help me on this thing, but I would expect that all of those reports are and those components of the project that are they're sort of report and people driven are going to be exempt from CEQA. But it still appears to me like the state needs to agree with us that those projects are CEQA exempt. And so we're going to have to walk through with the state how we get their sign off on or their agreement with the fact that a particular project is CEQA exempt. Usually, as this board knows, that's usually handled by a simple resolution that the BWD board would adopt. It says, based on the following provisions of CEQA and the CEQA guidelines, this particular project is exempt, and that's something that's relatively easy to do, but somebody has to be in charge of doing that. And the way that we've written these subgrantee agreements, and sorry to jump ahead with these details, is that all the subgrantees need to figure out what their CEQA compliance mechanism is and actually do it, and then hand it over to BWD to do the formal adoption. So, for example, to the extent the Water Master has projects that they're doing that are subject to CEQA, they're going to do the draft CEQA compliance and then submit those documents to BWD for review and then approval by this board. And then after that, it has to go to DWR for them to sign off. And so one of the important things that we'll probably have to do soon after signing this agreement, when they come in the next couple of weeks, if not sooner, is ask DWR how quickly they can turn around and approve the CEQA documentation that we give to them. And whether or not they want to see it before we approve it so that they can sort of sign off on our draft before the board goes through its process. So there's a little bit of CEQA upfront that's normal for California public agencies, but in this case also extends to the subgrantees, whether they're public agencies or not. It doesn't matter whether the Water Master is a public agency or not, because BWD is a public agency and we're signing off on the grant and we're the ultimate funnel for all things grant. And so CEQA must be complied with 100% of the time, regardless of whether we're talking about a nonprofit or the Water Master. Next slide, please. So just to give the public a little reminder of what that $6.1 million is comprised of, we've got $250,000 in grant administration. We've got $1.3 million in the BWD AMI project, $206,000 in the monitoring well project over at the wastewater treatment plant. We have the Borrego Springs School District $384,000 education grant. We have the $200,000 resiliency strategy that Jeff was just talking about. We have the restoration of fallow lands at about $750,000. A couple $1 million for the Water Master groundwater management plan update. And then the GDE identification, that's a little over $1 million. And those are the components of the grant. And except for those first, well, numbers 2 and number 3, which are BWD projects, the other ones pertain to ones that are they're being handled by individual subgrantees. And so they'll be largely in charge of compliance. Next slide. The DWR grant agreement is pretty clear on what is an eligible cost that is eligible for reimbursement and what is not. As you can imagine, it's sort of work stuff is reimbursable, but stuff that's sort of more indirect cost or not is probably not reimbursable. So studies, engineering, design, acquisition of land and easements, doing CEQA, mitigation, monitoring, project construction, all that stuff is of course grant eligible, and all that stuff can be reimbursed provided documentation is given. But DWR and the grant will not reimburse for water supplies, travel and per diem costs, reserve funds, for example, for reserve funds for doing O&M on a project that's used for or that is built with grant construction dollars. You cannot do that. Each individual subrecipient or subgrantee and BWD, you have to pay for your own O&M on the stuff you build or install. Meals, food, response and cleanup activities, and indirect costs, those are all not eligible for reimbursement under the grant. And again, I think we all know this, but this is a 100% reimbursement grant, meaning you have to spend the money and then seek reimbursement for it. There's no advance from DWR on these project costs. We spend the money and then get paid back. Next slide, please. So in terms of disbursement of funds, as I was just describing, there's a quarterly report that's due about 90 days after, the end of each quarter, in which all the invoicing and all the backup and everything you can think of is submitted to DWR to show them that we are building our project, how far along we are, and here's the invoices with all the detail in order, and all that is submitted, and then DWR approves or does not approve that. And the way that we've structured the subgrantee agreements is that because these reports are due 90 days out, we BWD are going to get a commitment through these subgrant agreements that all the subgrantees have to provide all this documentation to BWDs 45 days from the end of the quarter, so that we have, our 4 or 5 weeks in order to compile that, process it, make sure there's not anything missing, and then BWD, hopefully before day 90, maybe day 88, submits that report and to DWR seeking reimbursement. And the way that the process works is that DWR, of course, is going to review very closely all that documentation. And there's a provision in the agreement with BWD that if they DWR find an issue, they don't like an invoice or something, then they send it back to us and give us 60 days to fix that. And if you don't fix it within 60 days, you don't submit anything back to them fixing your bad invoice or whatever it is, well, then you don't get paid. And you can't clean that up later. You just have a 60-day window for cleanup. And so in turn, we're flipping that around to the extent it's a subgrantee that invoice that has an issue. We're going to flip that back to the subgrantee and, of course, have them fix that as soon as possible so it can get resubmitted by BWD. There is a provision in all grant agreements that disbursement of funds from DWR is always dependent upon the state actually having the monies available. And of course, in this case, the grant proceeds were already bonded, so our understanding is that all the money is just sitting in a bank account somewhere waiting to be reimbursed, and it's not something that needs to be reappropriated by the legislature. But you never know if the economy goes sour, we'll see. But I don't think there is usually any problem with that. And of course, DWR is sort of a standard provision if they believe that the grant dollars and are not being expended in an appropriate way, or there's not sufficient progress going on with the grants and all these projects, they have the right to call us on that and even withhold money if we don't do that. Next slide, please. So in terms of the reports, and this frankly isn't all of them, but this is just sort of a subset of the reports that at the end of the day, BWD is going to have to submit, but only after receiving all of the input necessary from the various subgrantees. We have quarterly progress reports. At the end of each project, you have to do a completion report. And of course, we're going to have the subgrantees do that for theirs. There's a overarching grant completion report that BWD is going to have to submit again with the input from the subgrantees. There's post-performance reports. So for a period of about 3 years after all these projects are constructed, we have to, on a yearly basis, show DWR that what we put in the ground is actually working. And so you have to do that for 3 years. There's environmental information forms and others. And one of the other big items that's out there is a monitoring program. And very early on in the grant, there's a requirement that there be a monitoring program submitted by BWD to DWR, which of course requires each individual subgrantee to give their input on how they're going to monitor after the grant is complete, the success of what they have done. And so I think one of the knocks at the door that you subgrantees can expect, and you'll see it in your subgrant agreement, is that BWD very closely after, probably early next year is going to knock on your door and say, okay, here's the project you're proposing to build. How are you going to monitor that both along the way as you progress to build it as well as afterwards? And so there'll be some paperwork or some thinking to do on that by each of the local sponsors, as we call them, or local project sponsors. Next slide, please. So again, we've talked about these subgrantee agreements, and I understand from Jeff that this isn't common among the Sigma grants, but I can tell you I've done a lot of local project sponsor subgrants with various other state water board and DWR grants in other contexts. And so this is actually a pretty common occurrence for there to be local project sponsors. I haven't seen a lot of them with nonprofits involved, to be quite frank. A lot of times it's just local public agencies along with a big agency, like, for example, and I think Leanne's on the phone, she might know this. I've seen the County of San Diego have quite a few subgrantee agreements with local project sponsors on a variety of different grants from the state. At least I've reviewed those for the local agencies on occasion. Again, these local subgrant agreements are going to run coterminously with the DWR BWD grant agreement, which is 3 years. And then again, the grant amount is dependent upon what shows up in that final DWR agreement, but I expect it'll be those numbers we saw in a couple of slides ago. Excuse me, next slide. So from the local project sponsors focus, their responsibilities in large measure are driven by what's in the overarching grant agreement with DWR. They need to comply with everything in there so that BWD is in compliance with its agreement. So you have to comply with everything in the grant agreement, the implementation guidelines. You've got to timely submit all your invoices, reports, documents, monitoring program, grant completion, all that stuff to BWD so we can send that up the food chain to DWR. You got to comply with public bidding and other requirements. Again, public bidding largely focuses on public works contracts. So to the extent you're not doing a public works, that's probably a little bit easier to comply with. But if you're building something on the ground, then public bidding is more likely to be required. You've got to be responsible for the oversight and compliance of your subgrantee project. You're solely responsible for that, and also you have to maintain and operate that facility or whatever you put in the ground for the length of basically the life of that project, whether it's 20, 30, 40 years, and you've got to absorb all the O&M costs for that. And those are the same requirements that are on BWD for its projects, but the local project sponsor has to comply with the same. Next slide.
Excuse me, Tammy, I have a comment and a question for Steve. Do you want me to hold off until he's done or do it in now?
If it's pertaining to the slide, I think you just ask it when the slide's up.
Okay, yeah, it's pertaining to the slides. So one general comment is that I see there's something called the Water Data Transparency Act, something like that, that I want to be sure the water master is aware of, because I don't think that's the way the folks on the water master board are used to thinking.
So Diane, I'm sorry. If you have a question about a slide on the screen, ask it. But if it's at the end of the whole presentation, why don't we just save them till the end?
Well, all right, that comment was about these reporting requirements. But the question, Steve, is what you just said about putting out the public bid. So the Chip Council is planning on hiring a guy who's really expert at running community visioning meetings. Will they need to put this out to bid or just check with DWR or on this or what?
That's a professional services contract. Those usually do not go out to bid unless you want to, and DWR is not going to require that. Because the only way they would require that is if BWD has an internal policy that requires public bidding on professional services agreements. And I don't recall that you do. That's not ordinary to do that. So that's not in the nature of like a construction contract, Diane, if that makes sense. So professional services are usually bids are not required. Some agencies will require informal, like make a phone call to a few different entities. So whatever BWD's requirements are going to transfer down to the Stewardship Council or to Civic Well. Does that make sense? Which there probably aren't any, but I'm just forgetting off the top of my head.
Thank you. Thanks.
Uh-oh, can you still hear me?
Yep.
Oh, sorry. I think my video is, on my end, my video is holding up there a little bit. But requirements for disbursement of grant. Oh, can we go on to the next slide? I think we already did this one. Oh, sorry, I'm getting, okay, I got it. So again, this is probably repeating. You have to meet all conditions of the grant agreement. You have to ensure, I mean, and the board has talked about this quite a bit. If you're one of these sub-grantees, you're going to want to make sure you have sufficient cash flow and liquidity to absorb the costs as you go, because this again is a reimbursement arrangement with the state. It's not a pay up front, it's a pay in the past. Got to make sure you comply with CEQA. Got to submit your reports on time and all the rest. In terms of what we've done in these sub-grant agreements to protect BWD, well, to the greatest extent possible, as Jeff alluded to, we're just a funnel. We're passing both the obligations and the monies as they come in back down to the sub-grantees. But those sub-grantees have to be aware that the grant agreement has some fairly, straightforward terms in it that need to be complied with. And so we, BWD, can't be made to comply and made to dole out money if we don't first get it from the state. So if sub-grantee doesn't provide the information and invoices, et cetera, that are required to get reimbursed, well, we can't guarantee you're going to get reimbursed if you don't give us the money. We're not going to make any guarantees either way, because in some sense, we're just a funnel. We're funneling it up to DWR. BWD does not have any obligations to complete any of these sub-grantee projects. Those sub-grantees are doing them themselves, and they don't complete them. They don't complete them at their own peril, at least in terms of getting funding and reimbursement for that. And we're not required to disperse any funds. BWD isn't until we get the money from DWR. So if DWR for some reason slow pays, and they've been frankly known to do that in the past, just because they have a lot of bells and whistles they have to follow. It takes months and months and months, 9 months, a year to get reimbursed. That's BWD's not, at least under our agreements, responsible for advancing any money so that any of the sub-grantees can finish. You just have to hold out until the money comes, if that makes sense. Next slide, please. And finally, I mean, again, this is a function of the agreement with DWR. If there's any disputes, and particular disputes, what we're talking about mostly is it's not infrequent to have a dispute between somebody like a contractor you hire and an individual entity or agency. So to the extent, for example, the water master hires a contractor to do something and they don't like the way the contractor has done that work, or there's some kind of dispute about money, all this says is the water master is going to deal with that. BWD is not going to get in the middle of that dispute. That's something that the sub-grantee is going to have to deal with. We're not responsible for doing your project if you can't get it done. We're not responsible for the O&M or making sure that this in the ground project continues for the life of the project. That's on you. That's on you guys or the individual project sponsor. And at the request of the water master, there is a provision in there that there's a cure period for any issues that are found of 10 days. But I think it's important, and it's one thing I did share with the water master and their legal counsel, is that in many respects, this is a process driven by DWR. Borrego Water District cannot guarantee that you're going to get your money if you don't submit things on time. So even if there's a 10-day cure period, that 10-day cure is really less important than making sure that everybody complies with the DWR requirements, because if something's due day 60, BWD can't give you an extra 10 days till day 70 to get something in. That's out of our control. So even though it says we're giving you 10 days to cure, ultimately it's not, if it doesn't get in by day 60, there's nothing that we can do about it. It's all up to DWR, and they have timelines required in these agreements, or in the master agreement. So Those are some of the big items that are in both the GWR and BWD grant agreement as well as the sub-grant grant agreements. We've included copies of the latest draft from a couple of months ago of the BWD DWR agreement in the board packet, along with one template of the sub-grant agreement. And so hopefully those will, as Jeff alluded to, stay pretty close to being the same. I'm hopeful that DWR doesn't change too much but if we do, we'll give a red line to the board, make sure you see any changes. I think there might be a few changes in the exhibits related to the description of individual local project sponsor projects. But beyond that, I'm hopeful there won't be too many changes. I will finally point out just something to the extent there are local project sponsors on the phone here. There's all sorts of exhibits to the master agreement. And one of them is the Exhibit H, which is the state audit document requirements. And I know this is buried so far down that people might not ordinarily look at that too closely, but you might, if you're a local project sponsor, want to take a very close look at that, because the state, of course, because it's DWR, is subject to the California state auditor requirements. And so there's all these requirements that have been pushed down to BWD and then pushed down to the local project sponsors about internal controls and all these other things that public agencies have to have in place in order to make sure that their audit is going to be up to snuff. And so cash documents, accounting records, invoices, all this is stuff that larger public agencies, of course, and even small ones have to deal with every day, but maybe nonprofits and the like aren't as familiar with these requirements. And so I would suggest that, again, if you're one of the local project sponsors, you might want to take a look at Exhibit H and make sure your whatever internal compliance documents you have for your own audits are going to meet whatever the state requirements are. And it's not as though I expect the state to come down and rifle through your files, but if push comes to shove and something is amiss, they might easily turn to that exhibit and say, well, gee, we paid you, show us all your audit compliance and all that. And so just something to look at. And when I was leafing through that this morning, it reminded me that I have seen the state look at that exhibit before in extreme circumstances. So you might want to take a look at that. But beyond that, I'm happy to answer any questions. Thanks.
So Steve, Robert Rule of Order question. I forget, do we ask the public for questions first or directors first?
Ordinarily, the board can, of course, you as the vice president can make the determination you want, but usually you ask the board to provide any input that they have, any questions, and then you ask for public comment after that.
All right, thank you. Board members, do you have any input or questions? A lot of quiet. I actually have a couple. So Steve, there's in Appendix D, D31, it might be on page 49 of the packet, because I think I looked at the original packet, which talks about priority hiring considerations. Who would that apply to? What does that mean? And I think whoever's running the slides, I think if you go to the packet on page 49, I might have tagged the right page. Yeah, the bottom of the page.
I'm looking
D31.
at that. I'm looking. Yeah, I might have to get back to you on that, because the way I read it is if the grant agreement includes services in excess of $200,000, which means when I read that, my instant reaction is BWD or one of the subgrantees providing a service to a third party? And I don't know that BWD's projects are providing a service to a third party, so I don't think that applies to us. I'm scratching my head thinking, is the provision of services by the school district, because they're providing educational materials, potentially a service to their students? I don't know that off the top of my head. I'm certain, I would hope the school district will look at that and make that determination. But I don't think it's because we're hiring just because, for example, the Stewardship Council and Civic Wall are going to be hiring someone to assist them, I'm not sure that's the provision of a service, right? They're just going to be drafting a report. So I'm thinking off the top of my head, that's not going to apply to the Stewardship Council project, but it might apply to the school district project, depending on whether or not their educational materials constitute a service. Probably have to check with DWR, look at the Welfare and Institutions Code to figure that out. That's kind of a head scratcher right off the top of my head.
Okay. And then I noticed on page 62, Exhibit K, it says, well, and I'm sorry, I don't have the PDF number on this. It says not applicable. So this is Exhibit K. And I thought we do have local project sponsors.
Yeah, I agree with that. We'll have to look at where Exhibit K is referenced in the main body of this agreement, because I think this is the way it came over from DWR. And I don't see a reference to Exhibit K right off the top here. But we'll look at that. That's a very good point. I'll look at that. Not sure why all our individual member subgrantees wouldn't be listed.
Okay. Do any of the directors have questions? Any questions before I turn it over to the public? Looking at a bunch of people muted, so no. All right, public. Are there any questions from the public? Oh, sorry, Diane. Go ahead.
I was unmuting, sorry. So Steve, should we being BWD, make an effort to get people using this local project sponsor terminology? Or is that just like a funky thing that DWR does? Can we keep calling them sub-grantees or whatever?
Well, in the agreement, we're calling them local project sponsors because, frankly, that's what our BBK template, or at least the ones we've done before, we've always called these folks.
Oh, okay.
But sub-grantee sounds that's an easier word to understand, right? But
Yeah.
But I think for purposes of the agreement, we'll use the longer words because we're lawyers. We like to use as many words as possible. Right? So.
Thank
you. Sorry, David.
Yes, local project sponsor, a longer one, that's got to be better. I had two questions. In one of your early slides, I was surprised to see land acquisition as an eligible cost. I recall we had some conversations about that early on, and I was wondering, was that a change that DWR introduced?
My recollection, and maybe Jeff has a better memory of this, was we did, as a general parameter, DWR's grant agreement form template, which this is kind of based on, allows the acquisition of land for projects. But I think in our case, we had to drill down on that. I remember early on with respect to the implementation guidelines and when your committee met, and ask a lot of questions of DWR about what exactly they would be willing to pay for with this grant and what they wouldn't. Am I remembering that right, Jeff? Yeah. And so we really drilled down on that, and they came to some conclusion. Yeah, well, we might pay for this, but we're not going to pay for that. And I just can't quite remember what.
Well, I think it boiled down to it wasn't just land acquisition, because you're right. If you need to acquire land for a project, that's eligible. But we are acquiring water rights under our proposal. We were going to buy BPA and or water rights. So that's when we got real specific, and they came back and said, nope, that's not eligible. And that's when we went to solar, AMI, monitoring well, then solar got kicked out, and then that's how we ended up with AMI and monitoring well. So
right. Okay, now I remember.
What we needed was an ineligible expense. Even like water supply, right, is ineligible. That's right at the top of the ineligible list. So they're different.
So David, this would allow for acquisition of land under a monitoring well, for example, but only is needed as is needed for that well. Yeah.
Got it. Yeah, that makes sense. My second question had to do with the big check that's uncashed on Jeff's desk. I understand this A
It's a
reimbursement
fake
grant.
check.
Sounds-
It's a fake check. It's a fake check.
Ah,
It's one of those
okay.
big ones like you get on TV.
Got it.
So
So really big.
it's
Okay,
a
just
fake
Can't
one.
get it through the ATM. That's the problem.
It won't fit in the slot, I don't think so.
Jeff, you should use it as your background.
Oh, there we go. Yeah.
All right, thank you.
There any other questions from the public? Seeing none. So Jeff, your objective here was just to present this to us and enable us to ask questions. So if we
Yep. Could
completed
not
this,
have gone any better. Yes, exactly. Like your comments were perfect. That's the exact things that we wanted to surface today, just because in theory, I would love to approve it at the next meeting. And if you were to ask those questions at the next meeting when we're trying to approve it, it just leaves that, we're approving it, but we still have questions about this or that. So this or that. So thank you very much. We can now address your specific questions. If anybody thinks of anything else, please email me and I'll make sure Steve addresses it. And then all that will be incorporated into the final presentation that will hopefully be happening in 2 weeks.
great.
Thank you.
That now enables us to move on to item 2C, wastewater treatment plant study, something that we did see earlier.
Yes, thank you very much, Madam Vice President. Okay, so this is a follow-up of the item, let's see, it was probably 3 board meetings ago. Greg from DUDEC did an excellent presentation in reviewing the study that I included in the board packet. And just hit the highlights, if you don't mind, Esmeralda, let's scroll through the document and I'll just kind of remind everybody at least what I consider to be the important components. Every page is important, but in terms of an overview and what the general findings are, I'd like to maybe start with page 156 in the packet, table 2. And that shows the historical flows. That was an important part of this analysis, was to look to see which areas within our sewer collection system have provided how much flow to the wastewater treatment plant over the years. Was that it? Did I give you the right page, Esma? Table 2, 156 in the packet. Shoot. Going up or down. It was making me look for table 2, and I'll keep blabbing about it. Doesn't look like it. It has DUDEC stamped at the bottom. That's a different agreement. Maybe I gave you the wrong page number, but it's the part of the packet has DUDEC stamped at the bottom, and it's table 2. It should be like the 3rd or 4th page in on the packet. So anyway, unfortunately, not every contributor is accurately metered. And in this case, we have Rams Hill flows. We have flows that come from the lift station, and that would be the combination of both Town Center Sewer as well as Borrego Springs Resort Club Circle. So an important component of this study was table 2, and that showed the historical flows. And I do believe it was around 40% Rams Hill and then 60% the other 2 areas. Maybe a little bit higher. Maybe it was more 2/3, 1/3 in terms of, Esma, can you find the DUDEC section? Got DUDEC stamped at the bottom. Oh, page 113. Thank you, Kathy Milkey. Page 113 in the packet. Thank you. There we go. Up a little bit. Oh no, is that it? No. Should be a table 2. Sorry about that, everybody. That's table 2, all right. There's a different table. Esme, can you scroll up a couple pages? Sorry. Just before that. Is there a page number on there somewhere? Anyway, so I'll keep going. So then on page 163, there's table 4.6, which is the results of a very interesting analysis, which DUDEC did an excellent job in looking at each component in the water treatment and the wastewater treatment process, and looked at how much capacity is left within each component. And why that is important is if you looked at, let's say, the report that Roy gives us every month, it shows that we're what, 67,000 in an average day, 67,000 gallons per day on average out of a 250,000 gallon per day treatment plant. So you would think, okay, gee, we're at whatever that is, 30% of capacity. Well, that's not really how it works, because within the treatment process are different components. The grit chamber at the beginning all the way to the percolation pond at the end, and various components in between. And so DUDEC looked at each individual component and identified various bottlenecks, and table 4.6 in the document identified the bottlenecks, and they did a really interesting job and a great job in quantifying it in the number of EDUs that are remaining. So it basically says how many more houses can be built before we run out of capacity in various components. And a couple bottlenecks were identified. The nitrogen reduction capability is the biggest one by far. And on page 177, there's a cost estimate for the elimination of that nitrogen bottleneck, and it was around $1.2 million. So in terms of the existing wastewater treatment plant, the conclusions were, in addition to knowing, like I said, unfortunately not every component that's adding wastewater is metered, so we had to do some extrapolation by subtracting the flows at the wet well from the total treatment plant flows to get the Rams Hill contribution. And then we went for a number of years where certain meters weren't working. The good news is they're all fully functioning now, so we have a much better idea of what flows are coming from where. But an important part of this first portion was identifying how the plant has been used historically. And then also, as part of kind of what's up there now, is what improvements are needed to eliminate any bottlenecks that will, this is the important part, allow the treatment plant to meet its design capacity of 250,000 gallons. And at the top of the list was nitrogen reduction, and that's around $1.2 million to correct. So that's kind of the first half of the analysis, looked at the existing wastewater treatment plant, and that's the overall conclusion. Well, I think in general, we're in good shape. However, those couple bottlenecks, especially the nitrogen removal, will be fairly expensive at $1.2 million. Yeah, the other, I'll say half, by a little bit more than that, of the study looks at different cost of capacity expansion in different quantities. The plant currently, with the elimination of the bottlenecks, will treat 250,000 gallons. So DUDEC looked at adding additional 250,000 gallon increments. So there's cost estimates in there to go from 250 to 500, and then to go from 500,000 gallons up to 750. And then there's also a cost estimate for reclaiming the water and in essence reusing it for irrigation purposes. I think that was around $12 million. And then those first stages of expansion were in the $4.5 million range. And so basically the conclusions were, bottlenecks were identified that need to be corrected. And then we ended up with some updated and refined cost estimates of what it's going to cost to expand the plant in the future. And so it's very important information. Now just the real fun and the real work begins, and that is, when do we really take the steps to A, correct the bottlenecks, and who should pay for it? And then B, when should we take the steps to expand the treatment plant? And who should pay for that? Are also the very important questions that are on the horizon for us. So as a first step, I'd love to get the report approved. And then, as I said, the real work begins, and then Jess, myself, and David and others will start working on what's a reasonable schedule. I think the good news is we do have some time on the nitrogen reduction. We can talk about that once we start evaluating the schedule. And then who should pay for it? That's also another important part of the evaluation that will be kind of the next step for us going forward. So in terms of action today, I'd be happy to answer any questions on the study, but I'd love to get board approval, and then we will come back in, I'm not sure, a month or 2 or 3 with some recommendations about schedule and funding options.
Do the directors have any questions? Diana, you have a question?
Yeah, so thank you. Jeff, I think I remember from a few years ago that it was thought that as far as treating water for recycling to be used for irrigation, that we simply didn't have enough output to make that worthwhile. And what was it, $12 million you said it's estimated? I don't know if this is the time to talk about that. I'm also, go ahead.
Yeah, no, you're exactly right. I think kind of the point is there's not enough flow now. When it's 67,000 gallons a day on average, it doesn't pencil out. However, the point here is the recycled water component comes as part of an expansion. So I guess the whole point is we would actually use the expansion this time. So we would have 300,000, 400,000, up to 500,000 gallons a day coming into the plant. So the point is we actually would have the flows needed. No, it's still very expensive. Does it make sense? I won't give my opinion yet, to be determined, but kind of the underlying assumption is we would actually use it this time because the flows would be there.
But that's a great big assumption that never penciled out in the past, that we haven't used the capacity. And why should we think that it will now? I know, of course, about plans at Rams Hill, but that's a huge assumption. We really need to.
I just put the question out there. You're right. Now you're starting to talk about the answer, but that's to be determined, and that's part of the process that's coming. But to me, that's the question, right?
Great. I'm willing to move that we accept this report.
Are there any other director questions? Okay, we'll go for a second and then I'll ask for public opinion or questions.
I'll second.
Dave, so, then we have a second. Before we vote on this, is there anyone in the public that has questions or comments?
I have a comment if you'll take public comment.
Please, Kathy, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. This is Kathy Melky with Rams Hill. Hey, everybody. I just wanted to thank the BWD for having its consultants do this report. As Diane just mentioned, we are looking to expand Rams Hill, as you all know, and it's helpful to understand the infrastructure better. We haven't had the opportunity to review this report in detail, but we will have our experts take a look at it. And really, I think, as Jeff was saying, we are looking forward to the next steps and understanding how plant capacity will be increased, and if that, how the cost for that will be allocated among current customers and future customers and the different service areas here. So thank you for doing this detail. It's helpful as we move forward for our project, but I also think just helpful in general for the community. And I know that how we treat our wastewater is important for the aquifer. So thank you.
Thank you, Kathy. So Steve, just Anderson question, do we vote on a report? I don't remember voting on approving other DUDAC reports. Is this, or do we just question? You're muted, Steve.
Just votes to receive and file the report. You don't have to approve it. You didn't write it, so.
Okay, so.
Yeah, thanks.
And I don't see any other public that want to comment. So Diane, can you amend your motion to receive and file the report?
Yes, I do that.
And I think Dave, can you amend your second?
Absolutely.
Okay, so we'll call the roll. Director Duncan.
Aye.
Director Johnson.
Aye.
Director Rosenboom.
Aye.
And I also approve to receive and file the report.
Ooh.
All right, so we now move on, and I see we have Trey here, to item 2D, the State of California Technical Services Support Agreement Monitoring Well. Jeff, will you kick this off, or is Trey?
I would love not. I'd love to. Thank you. This is kind of similar to where we were with Steve's item in the Prop 68, and that is Trey has been working with the state for a long time on this TSS grant. And this would be for the installation of a monitoring well on the Bernan Ranch. And been going on for quite a while, and Trey's done a great job in managing that project for us. And so the state is in the process now of developing final versions of both the TSS agreement as well as the land use agreement that pertains to exactly that, the land use related issues associated with this project, access and construction rights and others. And so the final version of those documents will be available soon. The DWR is a little further ahead on the TSS agreement. So what you see here, there probably won't be very many changes. The land use agreement was still a bit more in flux, and that's the document that has gone back and forth. Well, I guess both had gone back and forth from being a BWD document to a water master document and now back to us. So Trey is really familiar with the whole process, familiar with the grant agreement. Steve's also been involved and asked some initial questions that I just threw in there into the staff report just to give the board a flavor for kind of the level of detail that Steve's looking at as he evaluates an agreement like this. So I'm not really necessarily interested in the total legal review on this one. To me, this would be more of a Trey issue, and I'd love for Trey to go through the agreement in terms of what it does and what it says and what the obligations are. But then maybe even more importantly is for Trey to give us a list of, my battery's running low, so I'm going to talk quick and plug myself in. For Trey to give us a list of the costs that BWD will incur as part of this project. And then I'd like a discussion with the board on what type of financial participation we might like to see from the water master. And I can think of the clearing of the site to allow for construction. Is that something that the board is okay with BWD absorbing that cost? Is that something the board would like us to request the water master to fund? A combination therein. And then are there any other future costs to BWD that we might want the water master to participate in other than the clearing of the site? So I'd like to get Trey's information and input on that. And anything else he thinks important and then answer any questions from the board. So Trey, take it over and I will plug in my laptop before I die. Thanks.
Good morning, Vice President Baker and board members. Can you hear me all right?
Yes, we can.
Oh, terrific. I threw in the chat to get access to share screen. I had a couple slides, not as many as Steve, but I always like to have slides so people can refer to some information. But while they're working on access, I can get started on the status of here we go. Let's see. Can you all see my slides?
Yes.
Terrific. Okay, so we're going to discuss the Technical Support Services Program, and I'm going to emphasize the word of program because unlike Prop 68, this is not a reimbursement grant. The Department of Water Resources directly pays for eligible costs such as drilling, construction, and equipping of the borehole. There are costs that they are not eligible, such as some of the land acquisition cost, clearing of fallow trees, and site preparation. The proposed location of this new multi-depth monitoring well is on the former Bernan parcel, APN 140070-02 in the northeast corner. There would be about a 200 by 200 foot area. This would be the staging area for the drill rig and associated equipment. And then ultimately, we're anticipating if we do a single completion or single well with multiple depths, about a 25 by 25 foot area. We're considering a nested or a clustered where we'd have a separate shallow well and a deeper completion, but we're working with the property owner on that specific design. So you might have to forget everything we've told you about this project in the past. This program within Department of Department of Water Resources is evolving. I think a lot of this is based on lessons learned in other basins. So there are some new requirements, and as you may heard, this is now back in the purview of the Borrego Water District, whereas we thought they were going to be able to sign this agreement with the Water Master. That no longer is the case. I really don't know the details behind the back and forth on who is the agency that they will execute with, but the latest is based on our understanding of the new Technical Support Services Agreement and what are the local agency responsibilities. So that would be the Land Use Agreement and any California Environmental Quality Act work, the design, operation, and maintenance of project. Previously, these drilling projects were going off of Department of Water Resources design. So this is actually something new, and I believe this is based on lessons learned in other basins, but both the Water Master staff and Interra is available to support in this design process. The finalization of design plans and specifications, again, this is something new, and I think based on lessons learned is that previously Department of Water Resources was going off their own design plans and specifications. So DWR will review what the local agency or agencies put forth and comment on it, and there will be some time to finalize the plans and specifications. Inspections and final completion. So this could be inspection of well logs, well construction, and final completion and installation of equipment. This is a little less explicit in the agreement. It seems that DWR is responsible for some of this, but it gives the option for the local agency to perform these inspections, and they need to be done by a professional engineer or professional geologist licensed in California. And the local agency is responsible for the operation of the project, all repairs, renewals, and replacements. So for monitoring wells, basically this is going to be the DWR will pay for the pressure transducers and telemetry equipment, but there is a lifespan of that equipment, say 7 to 9 years roughly. So after 7 to 9 years, the local agency would be responsible for replacement of some components of that equipment and maintenance of the equipment. The delivery of information and reports. So this would be the roughly semi-annual water level measurements and water quality information. And then finally, at the end of the useful life of the project, the local agency would be responsible for well destruction. So should Borrego Water District come to agreement with the Water Master to oversee part or all of some of these local agency responsibilities, that would have to be specified. The Water Master has approved budget for some of these costs. A lot of it was coordination with DWR on design plans and specifications and whatnot, but I think that the most recent version of the Technical Support Services Program has changed slightly, so there may be additional cost incurred. And then, as we previously discussed, the land clearing cost and the improvement of the grade of the land to have the drilling rig mobilized on site is not an inclusive cost with the DWR program. With that, I'll take any questions on the Technical Support Services Program.
Diane.
Thank you. So Trey, I have this awful feeling this is going to mean that it's going to take a lot longer. you had been hopeful that this could actually happen this fall, right?
Again, I think if this is a lot based on lessons learned in other basins, and Department of Water Resources is extending and putting out to bid, I think, different contracts for drillers for this program. I haven't gotten the latest on that. I believe they extended the existing contract, but yeah, it's going to take some more time to get this through the Water Master Board. If there's any additional cost, I'm not anticipating a significant increase in cost. There's probably some additional cost for review of plans and specifications and inspection. But I think we've kind of nailed down a lot of the cost already, and we've got a draft design of the well depths. We're going to put forward a dual kind of cluster completion where we have two deeper completions and then a shallower completion. We need to talk with the property owner and see if that cluster completion is going to work based on the amount of space we need. If that's not the case, then we'll go to one multiple completion, which is fine. It's just a little bit trickier to construct. But yeah, I was going back at my notes, and we started this. It's actually it has not been as long as the Prop 68. Like, one of the first presentations I gave was in March of 2022. This is obviously the second time around. We started this process 2 years ago, but most of the changes have been on the DWR side of things, where they are revising their agreements and contracts kind of real time here. So we're just responding, and I expect that we'll just come up with a revised cost estimate to provide the services that are not eligible for reimbursement, and put those forward to the Water Master Board for review. Would be the approach that I think that the Borrego Water District would want to take. But we'll have to revisit what has been approved by the Water Master, and see what additional costs would be involved and whether or not they would be willing to incur those costs.
So you pretty much have a design ready to go. The fact that we're now responsible for the design shouldn't slow things down terribly.
Yeah, we have a preliminary design. Basically, most of the design actually occurs based on the log, the site-specific information you collect during drilling. But our design would include the proposed depth, the proposed approximate number of piezometers we'd want to include in the multi-depth completion, which we think is going to be 3 or 4, depending if we do 1 or 2 boreholes. And then the diameter of the casing, the type of casing. That way the driller can provide a cost estimate, but we would determine the final design based on the site-specific information we collect. The one bigger lift is the specification, but we have templates for these types of monitoring wells for specification. So we'll just have to modify an existing specification. That'll take a few weeks to knock out, but it's not a huge cost to do. And then there'll be review by DWR staff, which is going to probably add time more than cost. They'll make some comments on our design and specification, and then if there's any revisions that are necessary, that'll take some time. I don't think it'll be a major cost. We're talking like a couple days worth of time, probably max, to do some of this stuff. So, but I think next step is to work with Water Master staff and come up with a revised cost estimate based on our understanding of the non-eligible reimbursement cost or non-eligible expenses, I should say. They're not reimbursement. And I believe it is the view of the board, the Borrego Water District Board, that the water master should incur these costs. So any additional increase in cost would have to go back to Water Master Board for review and approval.
I think I remember from a TAC meeting that there was some disagreement. You were recommending preferably 2 or 3 wells, and some others were not so wild about that. Is it now up to BWD, since we're the local agency, to decide how many?
The TAC has come to a consensus pretty much on this issue. They recommended proceeding with the clustered option of 2 boreholes. We'd have a multiple completion in the deeper one, and maybe the shallower one would just be a single or also 2. But basically the direction was to go back to the property owner, and we need more space for 2 completions. So basically we're going to go back to the property owner, ask if we can do the 2 completions. If they provide sufficient space for us to do that, then that was how we were intending to proceed. But if they are really going to limit us to a more narrow drilling area for the final completion, then we were going to revise accordingly and just do a single multi-depth monitoring well. So that was the direction from the TAC. So I think we're on the same page there. But once we get those answers from the property owner's representative, who was Aqualogic, once we get feedback from them and the property owner, I think we're ready to proceed with a final tentative design for the multi-completion well.
Thank you.
Other director questions? Trey, is there some overall arching schedule that we need to be cognizant of?
No, at this point in time, it's being funded through a reserve. So, there is kind of this first come, first serve issue we have to be aware of, because other basins are competing for these technical support services. And, the state has to have money in its annual budget to fund these. But unlike Prop 68, there isn't some period that this will extinguish. As long as every year there's funding for this program, then there'll be monies made available. But that there's no guarantee in perpetuity that the state's always going to have funds for TSS. So it behooves us to get this done sooner rather than later. So if the state gets into more of a budget crunch in 2024 or 2025, there's no guarantee they will have the money to do this.
Is your proposal, I'm a little fuzzy on the next step. Are you proposing that you, Trey, are going to go to the water master and present a more concrete proposal? So some of the things that are missing is the actual cost. The water master and water district, we need to know the actual dollars, right? Estimated dollars. Right. And there's a question on long-term ownership, or O&M, because it looks like the DWR expects the local project sponsor to have O&M responsibility for this well. And so that is a question between us and the BWD and the water master. Seems like there's other things that need to be more concrete for us to respond to.
Exactly. We thought that the water master was going to be able to sign this with the state, but they cannot, based on the latest information from the state. So the water district now essentially has to negotiate with the water master to take on some of these longer term responsibilities, like the semi-annual sampling and reporting of the well, the maintenance of pressure transducers, the ultimate destruction of the well when it's beyond its useful life. That will have to be spelled out between the Borrego Water District and the water master. Interestingly, and Steve might be able to weigh on this down the road, it seems that the local agency can designate these responsibilities per the agreement. So I think we might want to look into that a little bit more from a legal perspective. I know Steve hasn't really had the opportunity to review that particular section, but both Borrego Water District has authorized budget for Intera, and the Water Master has authorized budget for West Yost to be working on this. We still have plenty of budget to get this moving along. I think it's just there's been some changes in responsibility where the plans and specifications and the design were originally on Department of Water Resources. They've now shifted this over to the local agency in this latest version of the agreement. So we had not scoped out cost to do all of the plans, designs, and specifications. The approach was to work collaboratively with DWR to do that, but now they've kind of pushed that back on the local agencies. So there may be some additional cost. I don't think they're major, but I would want to certainly give the Water Master staff the opportunity to weigh in on what additional time and resources they might think are required to do the new items that are in this latest version of the agreement.
Totally agree. And Tammy, to get a little bit more specific, what I would like to do is for BWD, myself and Trey, to consult with the Water Master staff to determine the best word I could think of right now, cost-effective way to get the work done. And I guess the work done would be that list of items that Trey had on there, which were the items that aren't eligible. I think that's perfect for okay, these are the costs that we're going to have to incur in the future, because that covers everything from the beginning, clearing of the land, all the way to the end, destruction of the well. So to me, that's a great list. So I think, Trey, you're on the right track. Let's consult with the Water Master staff and collectively come back with, okay, what's the most cost-effective way to get I'm picking one, a preliminary design done. Trey, oh, we have one that's already off the shelf. It costs us blah, blah, blah to get it done. Okay, that's the best way to get item number one done. So that becomes the budget for item number one, or I forget which item that was. And then we have a complete budget for each one of the 6 or 7, I forget however many items are on the list, including the replacement of the transducer. Very important. I don't think they're super expensive, but that's a direct cost that's going to come up 7 to 10 years from now. So let's get a budget for each one of those. So then we have an overall budget for everything that's not covered. And then it becomes a question of who pays. So Trey, I'd love for you we'll continue to do what you're talking about, but the ultimate goal will be to have a budget for each one of those costs that aren't covered. And share that with everybody, bring that back to our board, and our board can strategically decide, okay, do we say, okay, Water Master, we feel it's fair for you to pay all of those costs, or I won't mean that literally, none of those costs, or somewhere in between. I think the first step, as Tammy was saying, is knowing what this is going to cost. Getting the feel, just based on your estimates at this point, of what each one of those costs that aren't covered will really cost us eventually. Sound good? Okay, yeah.
Are there any questions from the public? Questions or comments from the public on this?
Yeah, thank you, Vice President Baker. This is Kathy Milkey with Rams Hill again. We own the land where the Burnand monitoring, we own the Burnand land that this new monitoring well has proposed to be on. And Trey, I just wanted to make a request to you that you please copy me on the correspondence with the Water Master Board. I had not seen this new agreement from the DWR. And so in addition to the edits that you and the Water Master Board might have, we as the landowner would also like to take a look at it, as it will be recorded against our property, and I know that we'll need to be a signatory. So if you could just keep me in the loop, that would be helpful. And then we'll know what's going on, and I'm sure this will be on the Water Master's agenda at the right time also, because it will be a part of their monitoring program, as I understand it.
Absolutely, Kathy. Yeah, we just recently got this revised agreement, and Steve with BBK hasn't even had an opportunity to review it in detail. But we certainly will get it over to you as the landowner and to the water master shortly.
Thanks for managing this, Trey.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for working with us on this.
Any other questions or comments? Okay. That enables us to keep you on, Trey, because we move to item 2E, Borrego Springs Sub-Basin Water Master Board Report. And this is Dave Duncan and Trey, and I don't know, Jeff, if you have anything you want to say to kick it off. Jeff, you're muted.
Water Master, I got it. The Water Master is meeting on Thursday, so the agenda is out. Personally, I have not had a chance to review it yet. I'll dig into that as soon as this meeting's done. That's the latest. So Dave, Trey, any comments? Oh, and then
Well, there's nothing more.
We can get to that last item when we're done with these first two, about the de minimis well letter.
Well,
Sure.
There's nothing more for me to add. We have a meeting on Thursday. Some of the items that will be on the agenda will be election of new officers. Also a discussion about the sub-grantee agreement. And those are really kind of the two big things that are there. We are going to have a quick discussion about recording meetings. Staff has indicated that there is no significant additional cost to recording meetings. And as we're not compelled to comply with the Public Records Act, I'm sure we'll have some short discussion about how long to keep those recordings. That's pretty much it.
And to that, David, I'll just add that there's a technical advisory committee on Wednesday, November 2nd. The agenda for that meeting will be set at the next Water Master meeting, but we expect it to primarily be focused on the Borrego Valley hydrologic model, fiscal year 2023 scope and budget. And then I'll just add that also on the agenda is the Water Master meeting is the water year 2022 water rights accounting. So that'll be interesting to see the change in pumping over the last year. I'm expecting it to be about the same, but we'll see what the data indicates.
Any director questions? Diane?
I do.
Hey, hey.
I'm full of it today, aren't I? So Trey, about about budget stuff for the hydrologic model changes. I've looked at this briefly, so I could be wrong. It looks to me like the proposed budget for water year 2022 and 23 weren't acknowledging in effect that the water master got all this money from Prop 68, and I think I looked at like the part just for the budget for modifying the hydrologic model, rather, that was like $700,000 or $800,000. Is you're going to have to work hard to spend that money. Am I right about that? Or maybe you're not paying that much attention to the actual budget for the TAC yet?
Right. For the Borrego Valley hydraulic model for fiscal year 2023, I believe in the actual budget, there's only $30,000 roughly approved. They did submit in Prop 68 an initial budget of, it was over $500,000 to update the Borrego Valley hydraulic model, but I don't believe that was a final approved project, but they are discussing potentially shifting based upon our TAC meeting and future water master meetings. I believe they're potentially discussing shifting some of the budget between things like well destruction and over to kind of priorities such as the Borrego Valley hydraulic model. But this all needs to be discussed at the TAC level first, and then also at the water master level second, before there would be any revisions to their budget.
Right. So the earliest that revision could occur is possibly at the November Water Master meeting, and probably not till December, I guess, to give them time to think about it. When you said you don't think the hydrologic model was a final approved project from DWR, maybe Jeff can chime in on this. I didn't think DWR got down to the level of saying, you water master as part of component 6 or whatever it is, have to spend money on this, this much money on this much money on that. What?
Okay, each project had individual tasks built into it, especially some of these, like the Water Master projects that were really multifaceted.
Right.
Like our projects are really single, one specific focus, but that did happen on the Water Master agreement.
I think there's a lot of money there, I guess.
Yeah, and I just forget exactly how much was in that individual task. It should be in the grant agreement. I just was going to scroll up, but it's okay. I'll look at that later. But it should be in there as one of the subtasks within that project.
Yeah, I'll look for it too. Thanks.
Yeah.
Other director comments, questions? Water Master? I have one. One of the things on the agenda, I guess, Dave, this is a question for you, is the discussion of the town hall and the BWD's desire to have the Water Master participate in the town hall. Is there anything BWD should do to assist in that agenda item? It's an open question. I'm just asking.
Yeah, I don't necessarily think so. I think it's an issue of if the water master is going to participate, as was pointed out by Jim Markman, to comply with the Brown Act, it will need to be a scheduled meeting with an agenda. And I guess the issue before the water master is that what the water master wants to do? But I don't think that there's necessarily anything that this board needs to do or to provide to facilitate that discussion.
Okay. Any other director comments or questions? Not seeing any public. Anybody in the public want to ask a question or have a comment? No. I see there's 3 items here, Jeff. Update on board, update on TAC, and then discussion of the letter.
Yeah.
Do you want me to go through these individually? Are you?
Well, I think we're good. In the last board packet, we actually put in a draft letter that was going to come from BWD and go to the county and the state regarding that recent de minimis well application process. Just in between the last meeting and this meeting, Tammy had a suggestion that we be a little bit more specific in one sentence in that letter and literally add the terms by adding an annular seal or something to that respect in one of the sentences in the letter. So just for full disclosure, Tammy did communicate directly with Trey and made a suggestion where we add 5 or 6 words to that sentence. So I guess I'll just let everyone know verbally that we are going to have a few words added to that letter that was in the board packet last meeting as it pertains to literally suggesting that an annular seal be installed, because that was missing in a key part of the letter. So the issue got addressed in between meetings, and so this is just more of an update on what will be happening to the letter, and it will be going out shortly.
Any director comments or questions on that? Any public comments or questions on that? All right, no action needed. So I believe that now moves us to Committee reports, standing committees and ad hoc committees. Do we have any committees that have any reports? Just looking through the list here. I don't think so. So we go to staff reports. And Jessica.
Hi, good morning,
Yes.
board. I just wanted to
There she
provide
is.
a brief update on our legal expense review. Did you want to say your part first, Jeff?
Yeah, how about if I start, Tammy, and this is just more of a follow-up to there were some questions at the last, I think it was in Jessica's monthly report at the last meeting about, it came from you, Tammy, about the pace of our legal expenses and, do we need to budget more money for legal expenses for this current fiscal year? I had a chance to sit down and look at how we're currently spending our money. And basically, at least I consider a handful of projects are done or very, very close to being done. And those would include the wastewater treatment plant related studies, the easement with T2, the water supply policy, and the Mesquite Trails project. Those were specific activities that did generate some increases to our legal expenses over the last few months. And some are literally done and some we're definitely winding down on. In terms of the ongoing, we have the Prop 68 related activities with the various agreements and sub-grantee agreements. There is a letter that we will likely be sending to the judge as part of these court proceedings and kind of is everything okay with everyone? Question from the judge. So there'll be I think some effort that will be needed in that regard. And then would love to continue. Well, we're going to continue with the legislative support. We're just now gearing up and are on the verge of some really big things on the legislative side. So those projects will be ones that we have been spending money on, and I would like to continue going forward. Then in terms of kind of new legal activities, the development agreement with T2, we've talked about that, and the time is coming very, very short that we really do need to start those discussions. It's somewhat related to this easement at the wastewater treatment plant that is virtually done or very, very close to being done. So we'll be diving into the development related issues with T2 here shortly. There might be the need to do some sort of agreement review with the ISA and Padilla direct appropriation that cross fingers, toes, eyes, that is hopefully coming here in November or December. And that is that direct appropriation for the Borrego Springs Road transmission main and the Sun Gold area pipeline replacement. We will also have in the really now going forward, which really hasn't been showing up on bills recently, would be BPA acquisition activities. I'll talk about that here in a second when we get to my staff report. And those are kind of the biggies I can think of. So as I sit here and look about what's dropping off and what's being added, I don't see a dramatic increase in the overall budget. And we're spending about $10,000 a month on overall legal activities and then $5,000 a month for legislative. So I don't see those numbers changing significantly one way or the other, unless some hot legal issue pops up. Now, so knowing that, okay, I think it's reasonable for us to continue to expect to be spending about this same amount going forward. I went to Jessica and said, okay, Jessica, if we continue to spend $10,000 a month for overall legal plus $5,000 for legislative, what does that, what are the budget impacts associated with that? So she basically looked at all of our various budgeted accounts that pertain to legal fees, both the legislative services and others. And I'll let Jessica talk about, okay, now that we know that we're going to continue to spend around $10,000 a month plus the $5,000 for legislative, what does that do to our budget going forward? And I think she has a really great proposal and a great idea that really requires no action or no decisions at this point. So Jessica, why don't you share with the board how the budget looks, assuming we continue at $15,000 a month-ish total.
Right. So yes, as Jeff broke down, our general legal expenses are averaging about $10,000 a month. Our budget line item for general legal expenses is just under $75,000, which comes to only about $6,200 a month. We do also have that groundwater/water master legal budget line item, which is $150,000, which if we did spend it all, it would come to about $12,500 a month, but we have only been spending about $5,000 a month on average this year so far. So to bring it around, we just finished the first quarter of the fiscal year. And yes, our general legal budget has been 45% expended so far. So there is a potential to do a transfer of the budget line items from that water master category to the general legal category. But as Jeff said, some things are dropping off. So we're thinking review in 60 days. That'll give us 2 more months of invoices to see where we are in the scheme of things. And if we do need to transfer some of the budget from the water master legal line item to the general legal line item, we will ask the board in about 60 days on that one. So we'll just keep keeping an eye on it.
Questions from directors? I have a question. Do you anticipate that the Prop 68 grant administration, having listened to Steve's quite insightful and long presentation, that we, the water district, will need to help our local project sponsors with some of these requirements? For instance, understanding CEQA, and that's just one that pops in my mind, explaining to the local project sponsors what they need to do, how they do this motion, how it has to come to us, so forth and so on. Just taking a step back from that, how much do we, the water district, think we need to spend in supporting our local project sponsors to do the things they need to do for this grant, the Prop 68 grant?
If those are expenses that are reimbursable under the grant administration, then essentially it would not have an effect on our operating budget. That would just go, into that grant budget legal category, and then we would be able to seek reimbursement from the state on those. I guess, getting down to the specific items, I don't know if there's anything that would not be considered unreimbursable. I guess that would be a question for Steve, but as it stands, anything like any legal right now with AMI, any legal with the monitoring well project, those all get put into those CIP project budgets, so they do not have a bearing on the general legal category.
Excellent, Jess. Because Tammy, that first item that was on the list of projects that was in that BWD agreement was administration 200,000. That's for BWD to do the total grant administration. Now, what you're talking about in terms of supporting the sub-grantees, yeah, that's probably more me/us than Steve. And then to get more specific about what forms do you fill out, and what's the schedule, and what do you do with CEQA, I have literally asked Chris Martinez to schedule a meeting that once we get these final agreements done, I would love to have a meeting where we all get on the phone at the same time and everybody gets to hear, ask, answer questions about all those specific logistical issues about what's really required as part of this grant. So trying to hit all of those various topics that were part of that question/comment. And then within each budget, within each project is project administration for that project. So each sub-grantee has reimbursables that are okay to manage their own projects. So there's money to do it, and yes, we will be involved, but we can't be too involved. Are we pushing the baby out of the nest and hoping they fly? I'm not quite sure the analogy, but we can't have too many fingerprints on the process because it's theirs. But and all of them have said, hey, we're big boys and girls, and we can handle these projects on our own, and we don't need your help. So I'm going into this as each one of these applicants are running their own projects. Now, how do they know what to do? Excellent question. And that's first thing I want to do as soon as we get through the agreements. And I've asked Chris Martinez if it's okay to set up a meeting where everybody's on the phone at the same time, and everybody being the people that will have to fill out the forms, the people that will have to follow the CEQA process. So each one of the sub-grantees have one big group call, or probably more than one. So that's kind of the next steps on that project.
Okay. Okay, so here's another Robert Rules of Order question. Now, do I ask for each one of these topics, do I ask the public if they have comments and questions, or do I just roll through? I guess, Steve, if you're there, a little guidance on this would be appreciated.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah,
Oh, okay, sorry, my system's screwing up here. Yeah, you can take public comment either on each individual or collectively. Collectively is fine because they're all listed together. So either way, that's most convenient for the board.
Okay, we'll just go through all the staff reports and I'll open it up to the public at the end of staff reports.
Thank you.
So that's, Jessica, do you have anything else on legal expense, on finance? I guess you have anything else on finance?
Not today, thank you.
All right, Jeff, you're on with general manager.
Yeah,
Staff
excellent.
report.
Thank you very much. Let's talk about BPA acquisition. As we all know, within the next 18 years, BWD is going to need to find, what, 900 and something acre feet of water, or less than 1,000 acre feet, to comply with the ramp down requirements. Now, we're fortunate. We have the ability to carry over water, so we don't need the water mathematically tomorrow. I think it's always best to be prepared and start planning. So I think as the board and I have been discussing over the past meeting or 5 or 6 at various times, the time is now to start to reach out, talk to BPA holders about potential BPA acquisition. So I've begun that. Talked to the ones that I think are the most likely to be interested, both big and small, and had a great response so far. Nobody has said no yet immediately. There have been no hangups. I've really emphasized kind of the community benefit and the community, I don't want to sound corny, but the real true community service that would be provided if any BPA holder decides to work with BWD and BWD acquiring their BPA, just because obviously BPA acquisition is at the top of our list and critical for the future of Borrego Springs. Obviously, without the water needed to meet our existing demands, we'll have to take showers 3 days out of every 10, right, Dave? So, and we don't want that. So, and I'm not joking. It's a very serious issue, right at the top of my list. But really been pleasantly surprised by the response. And like I say, people seem to be very receptive to the community benefit of helping BWD meet its BPA needs going forward. I'll keep you all updated. Get more specific once if I do get any specific deals cooking. We'll keep you all posted as events dictate going forward. And then last but not least, I do believe it is now official. I think I was on the phone with you last night, right, Diane, about you were on the Registrar of Voters website as we were speaking. And I think it was official that Kathy and Diane were the two that were that had filed, right? I think Dave told me he got the phone call or got the letter, right, saying that he was it. And then I think Kathy also. So I think as we had assumed had happened when we met 2 weeks ago, we did only have 2 of the 3 positions, only 2 people file for the 3 open positions. So there will still be that 1 unfilled position that the BWD board can fill here in the next few months. And I'll huddle up with Esmeralda and figure out exactly, and maybe somebody in Steve's office to figure out exactly what the schedule is with that in terms of the board appointing the director for that 1 open seat. It's will not be filled as part of the election. So congratulations, Dave. Congratulations, Kathy. Thank you very much for deciding to continue.
So question on that is, can people write in names and therefore be elected that way?
Crickets. You know, I'm not sure. Steve, any idea about that?
That's an interesting concept. I haven't heard of that one before. I'd have to check with our election law people. We do have those folks. So
Yeah. Hey, Esmeralda, wasn't there?
It's funny.
Esmeralda, didn't you say something in your presentation a couple weeks ago about there was something about a deadline for write-ins or something, or did I imagine that? You were telling us about the status of the election process.
Yeah, there is a deadline for write-ins. I can double check really quick and see what it is.
Okay. So I guess it can't just be anyone. Mickey Mouse or Donald Duck or Goofy can't get elected.
It's my understanding that there won't be any indication on the ballot regarding the 3 positions.
Oh, you're right. Nothing will be there. Yeah, no printing of
Nothing.
anything. Huh? Yeah.
Nothing will be there, so there will be no formal opportunity for people to write in a name.
Yeah, excellent point.
It just won't show anything on the ballot regarding us.
Excellent point. There you go. Thanks, Esma. We're good. All right, thank you. Any questions?
So we're reaching the conclusion of our open session. Are there any public comments or questions on staff reports? Hearing none. Do we have to vote to close, or can we just close open? We can just close open? Okay, so how about, do you guys want to come back at 11:35, like 7 minutes? I see nods. All right, I will see you all at 11:35.
Thanks, everybody.
Okay.
Thank you.
You.